Welcome, everyone, to the Judge Finn Show. We're happy to have you. What I got was a ringside seat to life. I got a ringside seat to poverty, to domestic situations, and to just being young and stupid. It ranged from everything. So I was born in the Catskill Mountains of New York, little town called Monticello, way back in 1950. Growing up in the Catskills was great. I grew up and I was in a family of 5. My father and mother are from Louisiana. I should say were, they both passed on. And they were from Louisiana, as were my grandparents, most of them. One of them was from Mississippi, I'm told, my maternal grandfather. But he and his brother came over to Louisiana because my mother was born right in that corner with Louisiana and Mississippi. And so 2 brothers married 2 sisters. So I have a lot of double cousins because my mother came from a family of 14, and she was toward the end. So those 2 people found their way to the Catskill Mountains, but my grandparents came first. My grandparents started a church in Monticello back in 1939. And it's a Pentecostal church. It still stands today. I have a cousin who's the pastor, and I was raised in that church. That was a very interesting experience because the church was right next to a nightclub. So you would hear hallelujah, hallelujah, thank you, Jesus, and then you'd hear the boom, 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 boom. I found each of them equally attractive. That went from, the time I was a baby until like 1968 when I graduated from high school and went off to college. 1968 was an explosive time. It's very interesting because as I look back on it, and I was born, as I said, in 1950, and it was mostly 1968 when we turned 18, the 1950s, when everything jumped off. It was the civil rights movement was right in its heyday. We were coming out of high school at that time. We were beginning to understand that everything we learned in history was not true, or at least we didn't have the whole truth. But I feel, at having now, an understanding of what really went on through a study of history and through my own recollections, it was just a time of turmoil that was due. It was absolutely due in America. Sullivan County is the county that Monticello sits in. Rural, very Jewish, lots of hotels. If you know anything about the history of the Catskills, it's called the Borscht Belt. And the reason it's called the Borscht Belt is because I believe in the early 20th century, a lot of Jewish people came here because, much like black people, they weren't accepted in many places. And so they did something that was very smart. They built their own. They came to the Catskill Mountains and they built all these different hotels, and we had so many of them. And growing up in that atmosphere, what you had was the winters were quiet, and then the summers came alive like a flame. It just was, a lot of people came, the roads were crowded. And as anything else in life, there's a yin yang to it. To every negative, there's a positive. The positive was we finally saw some people. The negative was they were taking up my space. So, it works both ways. But it was a wonderful time to grow up, magical time, tumultuous time, very tumultuous time. And so that's when I went to college. There were a lot of things going on during that time. The first thing was I'm leaving home, going to college for the first time away from my family. I'm the youngest of 3, so I knew kind of what to expect from college. I went to the State University of New York at Oneonta, which was about an hour and a half from my house by car, but I had to take a bus. So then it became 5.5 hours. And so I had to take that ride, and then I'm way up in the woods, further than I live, in a town that had 1 black family. I said 1. And so when I got there, along with several other young black people, it was a shock to the community. I had some experiences there too, but they had some experiences from me too. The first thing that happened to me when I got to Oneonta was they handed me this stupid looking beanie and said, Frosh, those who may not know what Frosh is for freshmen, you have to put this on. And I said, I'm not putting that shit on. That's exactly what I said. And I turned to my classmates. There were quite a few standing around. I said, and you shouldn't either. What is this? What's the meaning of it? What's it for? To me, it was just for humiliation. I don't like the hazing. And that's what it was. It was a part of hazing. I don't like hazing. They called it hazing. I didn't interpret it as hazing. They called it hazing. But they thought that was the appropriate kind of hazing. I didn't think hazing was appropriate at all. We didn't wear them, and hazing was over at Oneonta when it was all said and done. I remember they brought me out to introduce me to the whole freshman class, because by the time I got done, everybody on campus knew my name, and everybody was refusing to wear those beanies. So at that time, I became absolutely responsible for ending hazing at the State University of Oneonta, New York. People knew my name. They gave me a different name. They called me Josie. I hated that name, but it seemed to stick. So I just dealt with it. But that story grows into something else. Later, I'm going to jump forward just a little bit and say to you, much later in my life, I really began to understand what I came to Earth to do. And so when I teach younger people about knowing who you are, I have to talk about that experience and other experiences that got me to understand what I came to Earth to do. And that is, I came to Earth to be a change agent. Wherever I've gone in my life, something has changed. And so it finally dawned on me that that was my mission. And so it gets you, what that gets for you is two things. The first thing, you have to know who you are in this world. Because if you don't know who you are, the world will name you. And I learned that lesson also in my life at a very early age. And so that's what went with me through the years that made me stand up and say, no, I don't want to do that. Well, when I was young, I told you my parents were from Louisiana. You're looking at me. I am a black woman, born to two black parents who raised their children in New York because they didn't want to raise them in Louisiana. And the reason they didn't want to raise them in Louisiana is because of the experiences that they had there. Some of them were not very pretty. Okay? I could say many of them were not very pretty. And so they followed my grandparents, I believe. You know, people migrate in patterns. And they followed my grandparents out of Louisiana. My grandparents went by way of Detroit and came to New York. And my parents kind of came to New York and went to New York City, where my sister and brother were born. I was born when they came to Monticello. The first thing that shaped my identity was, you know, kids. I don't see kids playing so much outside these days. They're mostly computerized. But we played outside a lot. We made snowmen, we rode our sleds, in the summer we jumped rope, hopscotch, we did all the things, kickball, you name it, we did it outside. And so we were out playing, and I believe it was in the winter, and some new kids moved in the neighborhood, and they were white children. And they had never played with us before. And so we asked them, do you want to play? And one of them said, I don't play with niggers. That's what he said. And let me just make a note here. I get the N word and that people don't like to use that word anymore, but that's what he said. And so that's what I'm telling you. I'm reporting it as I heard it. And then I'm reporting that I whipped his ass. I'm reporting that too. And so I go in the house and I'm furious. And my father says, well, why are you out there fighting? I said, he called me a nigger. And my father said, sit down. You, your sister, your brother, all of you, we all had to sit down and get the same lesson. I guess my father felt that it was more conservation of his energy if he just talked to us all at once. And he said, come on, what's your name? I said, my name is Josephine Victoria Finn. And he has no right to call me anything else. And my father says, but are you what he called you? I said, of course not. He said, then you don't fight over it. You have to know who you are, Josephine. Do you all hear me? And he's looking at each of us. You have to know who you are. You don't answer to what you are not, and and nobody can make you be what you are not. And so once you know who you are, you don't have to scuffle like that. That kind of stuck in my spirit. And what it did was, no matter what happened to me in life, no matter what people said about me, and I grew up in a small town, I told you, people talk about you all the time. They really do. I didn't care. Because I knew who I was. And when you know who you are, you don't have to answer to anything else. And so that's a nugget that I got, that I took with me my entire life. Now, on top of that, I had two totally different parents, even though they were both Aries, very disciplinarian. One was a preacher, my mother, and my father was not. Very simply put. My father was not a preacher. My father drank. My father gambled. But he would not let his children see that part of it. You know what I mean? It didn't happen in my house. But you would see the results when he came home. If he came home broke, you knew he'd been gambling. If he came home lit, you knew he'd been drinking. So but my mother took me to church 8 days a week, I might say. I am not religious to this day. I had enough church. Okay? My knees are worn out. I can't do it. But seriously speaking, I'm just not religious. But I took away so much spiritual learning from that woman that carried me through my entire life. So I had the perfect combination. I had a father. That man who drank and gambled said to me, you need an education. You've got to get an education. I heard it for as long as I can remember. So that was just a perfect combination. Get an education and get God. So I had both of them. You know what I mean? Yeah. But I just have my personal talks with God. I don't need the preacher to be the intercessor. Before I went to school, my mother took in ironing when I was little, because don't forget, I'm the youngest. So the other two are in school already, but I'm home. So she can't really take me to work with her. She cleans, she does manual labor. She had an 8th grade education at that point. That would change later. Interesting. So she took in ironing, and she would be ironing, and she'd have me in front of this TV that was this big. Back in the 50s, TVs were like this big and black and white. And I'm looking at this little box, and these shows are coming on. And there was a show that came on that was very controversial in the black community later, called Amos and Andy. And I used to sit there and watch it because I'd never seen people who looked like me on TV. And there they were. And one of them was a lawyer. It was a comedy, 2 black men. They lived in New York City, I believe. They're in an apartment most of the time when you see them. And something crazy has happened, like I Love Lucy kind of stuff. Something has happened, and they get into these crazy situations. But the way they shot them, the way they treated them was that kind of like that comedy buffoonery that black people despise today. And if you go back and look at the old black and whites, you'll know what I'm talking about. They tried to make their lips look bigger, and it was stupid shit, if you ask me. But that was not what I paid attention to. I was a little girl. I was probably 3, because I went to school when I was 5, going to be 5, right? So I'm sitting there watching this and saying to myself, he's a lawyer. And it kind of stuck in my head. I get to 4th grade, show and tell. One of my classmates brings her father in. What does he do? He's a lawyer. Second time it entered my consciousness. And I said, I think I would like to do that. I'm sitting there as a 4th grader saying this to myself. Went out of my head. Then I wanted to be a chemist. Until I took chemistry. Then I wanted to be a psychologist until I met a few crazy people. My understanding at that time was just that he had some kind of importance. He wore a suit. That was important to me. You can imagine by the time when I was 3 years old, where would I be that I would see people wearing suits at church on Sunday? That's the only time I really saw people wearing suits. So I think it was that, and he was talking about things that seemed to be business matters. He did a good job of saying what lawyers do. And I kind of said, they kind of, in my 4th grade mind, they kind of turned the wheels of society. Okay. I thought that was pretty good. And so as I got older, by the time I got to maybe 10th grade, 11th grade, I'm thinking to myself, this is something I could really do, but I still have that psychology thing on my brain. And so I'm thinking I might be a psychologist. So when I get to college, I take psychology. I don't take political science like most people take when they want to be lawyers or something they think that'll get them into law school. I take psychology, and I notice we don't have a Black Studies program. And I want one, and my classmates want one, and we fight for it. So Black Studies means this. It means we were left out of the history books when I learned it in high school. So where is my history? When you talk about the history of America, the only thing you talk about is the enslavement of Black people. You don't talk about all the other things that were done. How about all the inventions? Things that would, when you go, I said my mother took in ironing. That ironing board was invented by a Black person. So, blood plasma, there's so many different things that Black people did that was swept under the rug. So I was furious. And so if you think about that time, 1968, 1969, right? That 4-year period that I was in college from 68 to 72, when you think about that time period, there were a lot of mad people, and we were all the same age. Different people for different reasons. White students were really protesting the Vietnam War. Black students were protesting not having the truth told. And guess what? We're right back there again. We're right back to that not having the truth told. It's cyclical, it seems to me. It's crazy. So 1969, I would have come home from my first year of college. And the first thing I hear is this thing, Woodstock. I said, what's going on? They said, this music festival's coming to town. These are the young people talking. We used to congregate up on Broadway in front of a hamburger shop. And we were like, what? This music thing is coming? How many people? About 50,000 people. 50,000, we thought. That was humongous. So the next news I get is you could get a job there doing something, and that'll be the way we get in because we couldn't afford tickets at that particular time. So I go to get the job. The guy comes, he interviews us. He says, you're going to be selling sandwiches. I said, cool. Meet me out there such and such a time, August, whatever, 17th, whatever date it was. And so I came. I came in a little Mustang convertible with 2 high school friends. They were twins, I remember. And we drive into Bethel. And we've heard the story by then that Yasgur's farm is going to let them have this festival on his farm. Well, Yasgur, I've been drinking his milk my whole life. The guy used to bring the milk bottle in the little metal box when I was a kid, and it would have the cream on top. My mother put the cream in the coffee. So Yasgur, we all know Yasgur. So, okay, I'm at the farm, humongous place, beautiful, green. And there's quite a few people. The roads are getting kind of jammed, and we make it in there just in time before it really just stopped. It was like a backup to the thruway. It was crazy. And we're hearing this as people are coming and going. They're telling us. And we're riding in there, and people are throwing joints in the car because we're in a convertible. And they're just throwing red ones, blue ones, green ones. And I'm like, they're throwing drugs in the car. Okay. What's going on? So we get to a spot on the hill. He gives me my sandwiches. And I look around after about a half hour, 45 minutes, and I notice I'm like jammed in. There's like people everywhere. I'm looking down the hill, and there's like thousands of people, and they're still coming. And it was just like, whoa, this is something unusual. And so I gave the sandwiches away, kept a couple, gave him whatever money I had made. And I just went down the hill to listen. The first act on was, if I'm not mistaken, was Richie Havens, who I happened to have his album. So I was psyched. It's Richie Havens in person. So I went down and listened to him. And I hung around all night long trying to find the people I came with, because now I'm getting tired. And I want to go home. Different artists are coming on stage, and it's just packed. Everything's going on. There are people in the woods making love. There are people smoking reefer. People just having a good time. They just, peace. Okay. I still can't get home. So now it starts to rain. into the next day, I'm there. I never find these people that I came with. So I'm hanging around and I see a Coca-Cola truck. And I ran over to the Coca-Cola truck. I said, where are you delivering? And he told me someplace. It could have been Swan Lake that he was delivering. And that wasn't far. So I thought, could you give me a ride? And maybe I can find somebody, call somebody, and get out of here. He said, well, I can't put you in the truck, but you can sit on the side. Those trucks were slatted open on the side. All the Coca-Cola bottles would go there, but he had just delivered, so it was empty. I said, fine. I get on the side of the truck, and he takes me over to Swan Lake. And I'm just sitting there. I get out, and I'm just sitting on the sidewalk, on the corner. I'll never forget this. I'm sitting on the sidewalk. I am muddy from head to toe because it has rained, and I've been sloshing around, and I'm hungry. Sandwiches are gone. And I don't have a phone. There's no cell phones in those days. So I'm just, no phone booth anywhere I can get to. So I'm just there. And I don't know how much time passed. It wasn't a lot. And I'm just tired and like this. I'm just sitting. And I see a limousine turn the corner. Like down the other corner. The limousine comes around the corner. It's a stretch. And I'm looking, what are they doing out in the middle of the woods? And it pulls up in front of me and it stops. The window comes down and I look at the guy and I said, Oscar. Oscar was a chauffeur for the Concord Hotel. And he knew my family. So, for some reason, you can make up your mind, he was riding around in those woods and he found me. And he brought me home to my mother. You could say that. I would say, my good God, as always, was looking out for Josephine. And he came specifically out there and got me and took me home. My mother was like, praising God. And she thought, she didn't know what. She just knew I was out there with all these people and that the streets were jammed. And she didn't know what was happening. So, but I made it home because, of course, we all know the back ways in the woods and when we grew up in these places. So we made it home. But that was interesting. I didn't wake up until Woodstock was over after I got home. You know what I'm saying? It was 3 days. I was there for the first into the second day. When I got home, I slept for like 24 hours. It was, you know what? I was more taken with the people and the atmosphere. I was not here's a good example of that. A young black man walked up to me. We both had our afros. My afro was like, boom, very big. He walks up to me and says to me, are we going to stand up out here today? And I looked at him, and a lot of people at that time would probably have described me as fairly radical, but I looked at him and said, are you crazy? There's 500,000 white people out here. What are two of us going to do out here today? This isn't the time. Just enjoy the festival. We'll get back to business on Monday. But timing is everything. That's what I was saying to him. This is not the time. This is not that kind of event. All these people are peaceful. I don't care who they are or what they look like. And so we're not going to do that today. But we're not done by a long shot, but we're not doing that today. I went to see a friend of mine. He's passed on. His name was Ira Cohen. I loved him. And he loved me. We were just good friends. He was a little bit older than me. He was about a year or so older than my brother, I think. I go to see him is when I'm in college. I don't remember what year, but I remember I came home one summer and I went to see him and I said, I've been thinking about law. Can I work for you? And he said, sure. He gave me a job that summer. And I remember he had me out doing investigations for some of the stuff he was doing. And he had a yellow taxi cab that he bought. He was an eccentric guy. That's what I loved about him. He wasn't the run of the mill. And so he gives me the keys to the taxi cab and has me out doing these investigations. I had a taxi cab about 2 times and the thing broke down and that was the end of that. So now I'm in the office and I'm doing research. He's showing me the law books and I'm looking into the law books and I'm looking at some of the cases and I'm thinking, yeah, forget psychology, this is it. And so even though I graduated with a dual degree in psychology and black studies, I went for law. And I'm glad I did. You know, when you go to law school, they basically let you know that you're there hopefully for the shortest amount of time you can be there. The first day, they brought us all into the auditorium and sat us all down, and they said, "Thank you for coming to law school. Congratulations. We welcome you. You want to get out in 3 years, but we want you out now," basically. And I'm looking like, what the hell is he talking about? This is the dean. And he says, law is a very difficult, subject. And so 2 out of 3 of you aren't going to make it. What a pep talk. He says 2 out of 3 you're going to make it. So look to your left. I look. And there's a white guy sitting to my left. Look to your right, white guy sitting. Because law school, come on. Very few women, and black women, forget it. And so we were a very, very small amount in law school. So I'm looking at these people and I said, well, sorry, fellas. Sorry, you're not going to make it, because I'm absolutely graduating from this law school. University of Buffalo Law School is where I went to law school. Buffalo, New York. Wow. That's where I met my first buffalo wing. And I haven't tasted any like it since. I got to tell you. Yeah. I met Toronto. That's the first time I kind of left the country. For a long time, I hadn't been out of the country. When I went to Buffalo, I went up to Toronto, and you did things other than go to law school. I didn't have any apprehension in applying to Buffalo because I'd been to Oneonta. When I went to Oneonta, it was one black family. I told you. So basically, when I went to Buffalo, it wasn't a big deal until I got there, and there was a guy who was murdering black men. Many years in Buffalo, there was a guy, and it was on the news the first day. My mother came up with me. And Buffalo from Monticello is like 5.5, 6 hours. And we drove up there, and we get there, and we're in the hotel. We turn on the TV. There's a classmate of mine from State University of New York at Oneonta who has now become a reporter. She's from Buffalo. And she's on TV, and I said, oh, there's my friend from school. Wow. And she's reporting that this man is out there killing black men at bus stops. He was targeting them. He killed, I don't know how many. He killed a couple in New York City also. He killed a couple in Buffalo. And it was a really tough time coming into a city to go to school, and this kind of stuff is going on. And my mother was like, maybe you need to come home. And I said, I can't do that. I can't run from stuff like this, Mother. I have to do what I have to do. So I'm staying, but I'll be careful. And so I stayed. His name was Christopher, as I recall. I think it was Joseph Christopher. But he was caught, tried, and I believe, I don't know if he's still living, but he was found guilty. And went to prison. A lot of things happened in law school because when you're arguing legality, people say things, and sometimes people say harsh things, So naturally, when we studied civil rights, and some of my classmates had some things to say that weren't particularly endearing. And I had some things to say back that weren't particularly endearing. And I remember I was in a class, it was a torts class, and the idea came up. Torts, by the way, for those who don't know, is a civil wrong. So when you hear people suing, personal injury, you see those ads on TV, that's a tort, T-O-R-T. And a tort, we were discussing damages. And how do you assess damages? And the idea came up, and it happens to be true, that depending on your race, what kind of money you make, you could have the same thing happen to you that happens to somebody else, and they could get more money than you. It depends on where you live. People will tell you in my county that we get the worst verdicts, and you go one county over and they give money away like it's, going out of style. So this idea of damages we were discussing. And someone made a comment about, black lives not being worth white lives. And the teacher had to grapple with that and kind of saying, well, yeah, I guess, that does happen in the court system. People judge lives differently. And so I had a few words with a classmate about that. And afterwards, she called me aside after class. And she said, I want to talk to you, because I became very angry. And I really told them off. And she said to me, Josephine, you can't do that. And I said, do what? Said, in a courtroom, you'd be held in contempt the way you went off. And I said, okay. I tucked that lesson away, and I went home and I thought about it. And she got through to me. She basically explained to me that if you want to win, you have to do it in a certain way. You're in a courtroom, you're following the rules of the law, you have to win that way. It can't be a fist fight. It can't be, cursing people out or telling people off, even though I didn't curse at them. I really lit them up, though. And so she really let me know, if you want to win, there's a way to win. And so I took that into consideration. And all during my legal career, no one could ever accuse me of getting out of order in a courtroom or being held in contempt or, I learned how to do it the way that would get the result that I wanted. And that's a lesson I would like for everyone to understand, because I feel there are many battles at hand here in this world now. And that's something I'll be talking about in these podcasts, is what's going on in this world, because the masses are caught up in the matrix like I've never seen. If you look at world history, you find that there's always been the masses, the people who basically have about the same amount, and they're pretty much down here on the bottom. And then you have, America came up with this thing of the middle class. And then there were always people who were wealthy and who seemed to have more control. But now we've come to a place where there's a squeeze going on, and the middle class has just been squeezed out. They're disappearing. Why are they disappearing? I would submit to you that politicians have figured out a way to keep us at each other's throats. And it's become a part of the political landscape to pit black people against white people and straight people against gay people and so on and so forth. And we want to throw out people out of the country for this reason or that reason. We want to send Mexicans back to Mexico. I don't see us sending anybody back to Europe, by the way. And so this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Then we elect people who really don't have our interests at heart. We do it over and over and over again. Why do we follow these paths? We follow it because we haven't learned the lesson that I was forced to learn as a child. Know who you are. Know where you are coming from. Know what you came here to do. And no one can deter you from that. Know your talents. You didn't come to earth with no talent. And so I have a whole theory about those things. I have a theory about this world not being my home. And nobody can debate that with me. And the reason nobody can debate that with me is because everybody dies. Nobody stays here. We all come here and we leave here and go somewhere else, is my theory. And my theory is we go back home. So I've always referred to myself as the wayfaring stranger in a foreign land. And that is true to me about being on earth, period. I feel we're here for a reason. But you have to know who you are. You can't come here and let other people define you. There's one very, very easy way to find yourself. Be you. Don't worry about form. Don't worry about fashion. Now, if you love clothes, wear your clothes. You know what I'm saying? I just saw Tracy Ellis Ross, she's doing some travel show and she was pulling out all the clothes and she's got like a really flamboyant sense of style. And I thought, wow, she looks gorgeous. I would never wear that shit because that's not me. You see? And I've never tried to be anybody but me. You know, when you are trying to be someone else, you're literally stepping out of your own skin. That's got to be painful. So one guy said, be yourself. Everybody else is taken. Right? I'm in law school. It's the last semester. And they're saying to us, we signed up all these different corporate entities to come, law firms. Come, sign up, see if you get a job. This is one of the services a law school would do for its students. Everybody's going. Josephine's not going. I'm not going. I'm not going. And everybody's saying to me, are you crazy? Why are you not over there trying to get a corporate job? I said, oh, because I'm going home. I'm going to be working for Ira Cohen. And they said, oh, he gave you a job? I said, oh, no, he doesn't know yet. So I came home. I went to see Ira, and I told him the story. He laughed, and he gave me a job. And so I worked for him until he closed his office a few years later, and I had to make a decision. Am I going to get a job somewhere else? Am I going to do that? Or am I going to open my own practice? I made the decision that a novice would make. I opened my own practice. Whoa, that was something. That was tough. I didn't have a lot of money. I had no credit. I didn't have bad credit. I had no credit. And so a couple of years after I got my law practice open, I bought a house. I got very fortunate, and the guy held what's called a purchase money mortgage, which means he held the mortgage for me. I didn't have to go to a bank. And that's not easy to do. People who've bought homes know that. People don't generally just say, I'll hold the mortgage, I'll take the risk. But because I was a law graduate and had started a little law practice, he took a chance on me, and I paid him off. Pleasant Street in Monticello. It's an interesting place. The police station is there, and then there's a stoplight at 3 or 4 streets, and there's a stoplight. And there's a street that comes out onto the main street where the stoplight is. So it's a T. And I had a building right at the T, right at the stoplight, and it had a lit sign that I could put anything I want on it. And so I put Josephine Victoria Finn, counselor at law. And everybody in the county got to know who I was because that light, it was just a major stop place in Monticello. You had to go there to go to other little towns. You had to go there to go to the mall. And so people just constantly came through there, and they began to know who I was. A lot of late night burning the oil is what sticks out. You don't know really exactly what you're doing when you come out of law school. Even though you've passed the bar exam, you've opened a law office, you have the law books, you have been a judge to know how to think like a lawyer, and that's basically what saves you, because you use your brain the way you were taught to look at things and to analyze things. And so you do the same with your business. I kind of, kept my head down and found out what lanes I was really good in. And I stayed away from things that I didn't like or want to practice. And that's how I made. And I found a few older lawyers who were very gracious to me and said, if you need help. And of course, Ira was still around, so he was very helpful to me. And there were other lawyers who said, 1 or 2, who said, just call me if you have a problem. I don't like, to this day, estates and trusts. I avoid it like the plague, even though I've been a trustee more than once. And that's how I really learned the subject, is becoming years later a trustee for family members. But I avoided trusts. I did criminal law for a while, and then I avoided criminal law. It's very hard to get paid if you don't get them off. They're going away. I didn't like the messiness of it, just the storylines. It just wasn't my cup of tea. I would come back around to that later because I would end up being a judge and I would have to hear criminal cases. And that's when I really got to understand what I could do with the criminal law. But I did personal injury. I did closings, real estate deals, contracts. I found out that I had a knack for writing contracts. I ran into a guy 20 years later who told me he was using the same contract I wrote for him 20 years before. And he was actually pissed when Ira gave asked him, did he mind letting me do the contract? And he was like, do you know how to do a contract? I hear you're just out of law school. And I said, I think I do. I said, give me a chance and let me show you what I do. And then you'll make your decision if you want to use me. And he did. And that's when I saw him 20 years later. He was a DJ. And he said, I'm still using that contract. And I said, then that means I wrote it correctly. I stayed in business for myself until 2010. Around the year 2000, I got into a partnership. And we made up an agreement, and then we never signed it. And we said to each other after we made up the agreement, we said, if we have to sign this, we don't need to be together if we can't trust each other. And we never signed it. It just laid in the file unsigned. And we were together for 10 years. Another decision we made the day we started, because we were both very artistic and we wanted to do other things. I wanted to be on the stage doing my one-woman show that I'd written, and she did beautiful quilts, and she wanted to do her artistic stuff. So we said after 10 years, I think we're going to just go on our way. It just so happens that before that 10 years could be up, I was elected judge in 2002, and I sat on the bench for 20 years. I was appointed by the mayor of the village of Monticello, and I sat for a couple of years. And then something political happened that it involved my sister, and I came off the bench to represent her. Got that squared away. And then, you can't go back and say, well, give me the job back. So I went on. I went on practicing law until they asked me to run for judge. And the first time I ran, I lost by about 36 votes, 3-6. And obviously it was because I saw his mother. She came up with a stack of votes from Florida, from people who were snowbirds. But actually, I believed in my heart they no longer lived around. So, it was a little stinky. But he won, and I went on about my business. And people came back to me when 4 years were about to be up and said, could you please run again? You can win this. 36 votes, forget that. You can win this. And so I reluctantly, I ran again. Now there's a lesson in this that I want to be understood. I was very angry the way that went down. And I said, I'm not even going to bother, because first of all, if more people had come out from my own community to vote, 36 votes, I should have won. And I was done. And they came, they said, we know, we'll do better. We'll get people out, just run again. So I ran. Wasn't running against the same guy. He smelled the coffee, and I think he moved to Florida. I won the second time, and I was unopposed 4 more times, just unopposed. So fate intervened, moved me out of the way. When the timing was right, I was back. This is a very important lesson that you have to learn in life. Timing is everything. Sometimes you feel so terrible when you don't get things or when things don't go your way. But if the timing is not right, it's for your own protection. I was in the People's Court. What you see on TV as the People's Court, the small court, I was in the village court. I was elected village justice. Okay? 4 years at a clip. Your job is to hear criminal cases on the misdemeanor level. You can't get more than a year in jail, $1,000 fine. DWIs would classify as that. However, you also hear felonies to the extent that you have to have a hearing when a person is charged with a felony to determine if they're going to be held by the grand jury, if they request it. And so I did felony hearings. I arraigned people for everything from traffic violations to murder. I've impaneled juries to hear cases. I've sat on many judge cases without jury. I am probably the judge who had the most judge trials rather than jury trials, because people seemed to think I was going to be fair about it. And that's the term they used for me. And even to this day, I run into people in the grocery store. I run into people and people thank me. People tell me I'm the fairest judge they ever came before. And so I think that was it. I think they asked for me because they felt like they were going to get a fair shake. One case that stands out to me is a woman who was a victim of domestic violence. She had a boyfriend who beat her, evidently frequently. And one day he was beating her, and I guess she picked up a knife and stabbed him. And she was arrested, brought to court arraigned, and charged with a felony. And she was facing prison time. And I took exception to that. Now, you have to understand, the district attorney is looking to put this woman in prison because she stabbed somebody, and I get that. But what you're overlooking is that this man was beating her for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What were you doing about that? What was the world? How was her world unfolding for her? And so the way I looked at that case was everybody has a limit. Everybody has a time when they just can't take it anymore. And so what she did was wrong, absolutely, in response to what he did. She should have gone, of course, and gotten an order of protection, which he would have immediately violated if he's typical of domestic abusers. A lot of them, that means nothing to them. So you have a piece of paper, but they're going to come get you anyway. And so she may have felt trapped. As a matter of fact, I know she felt trapped because of the conversations that ensued after the arrest. I basically just stood in the gap. I just kept the case on my calendar so it didn't go to county court. Because once it hits county court, she's going to be tried for a felony, or she's going to plead to a felony. She's going to either go to prison or have felony probation or whatever. I kept it in the lower court. They started calling my court the court of refuge. because a lot of stuff stayed in my court to keep people from getting felonies they didn't deserve, in my opinion. But since I was the judge, my opinion mattered. I was as fair as I could be. You know, what I did, what I thought was right. You have to do what you think is right. I once had a case where, a criminal case, another lawyer came to me and said, my son's going to be here today. You're going to see him, and he's a good kid. He's going to med school, blah, blah, blah. And I said, slow down. Well, he was out. I said, what's he charged with? Drug possession, crack, cocaine. I don't know what's wrong with him. Okay, your son's in med school and he's using crack. Okay. He was using it with some local young people who have no father who's a lawyer, if you get my drift. And so they all get arrested, and he wants me to treat his son differently. First of all, he shouldn't have been talking to me, and I let him know that. And secondly, his son wasn't going to be treated any differently than the others. So we get in the courtroom, and evidently he's already talked to the district attorney, because the district attorney says to me, you know, we want to give him an ACD, adjournment in contemplation of dismissal. I said, what about where are the other defendants? Oh, they're in here somewhere. No, get them up here. They all come up. 3 young men, various races. I said, what are you offering them? Well, you know, this guy comes from a good home. I said, no, we're not doing that. You can't help where you came from. We're not doing that. Whatever he gets, they get. And that's the way it went down. And so that's why people started, the word goes out. You got somebody sitting there now that's not going to play the, good old boy game. When I was a prosecutor for the county of neglect and abuse cases, that was tough. That was tough. You get kids who have been burned. You get kids who've been beaten. You get kids who are neglected. They're hungry and all kinds of things. I had been prepared for that because I was a caseworker. As I told you before, I went to law school. I worked for what is now Children and Family Services, I guess. I worked for them. First as an examiner, I worked with people getting checks. I did that piece. And then I was promoted to a caseworker. And so I had seen all that. I'd been in family court. And so, but I wasn't prepared for having to prosecute, how you feel when you go home at night. after you've prosecuted someone for beating their kid half to death or burning them or, leaving them alone for hours while they go get drunk. So yeah, that was tough. Let's take what I learned as a caseworker, examiner, and dealing with poor people, because that's who you deal with, and being on the bench and dealing with mostly poor people, because that's who lands in court most of the time. It wasn't lost on me that this is a poor people problem that we have in our courts, a lot of it, and that they're treated very differently than rich people. And Judge Judith Kay, the late Judge Judith Kay, who was a chief judge of the New York State Court of Appeals. By the way, 2 of them have come from the village of Monticello that I was born in. The other one was the Honorable Lawrence H. Cook. He was also a chief judge of the highest court in New York. That's unusual, I would think anyone would think that would be unusual for 2 people like that to come out of this tiny village that I was born in. But they did. We've produced some interesting people out of small places. So that taught me something. That taught me you can get there from anywhere. And that's my advice to people to understand. I really want everyone to understand that what I got was a ringside seat to life. I got a ringside seat to poverty, to domestic situations, and to just being young and stupid. It ranged from everything. One of the worst cases I remember was a woman who came into the court. I first met her when she put up money for bail for a man who lived in her house. And he was helpful to her, she said. He drove her around. He did things for her. The next time I saw her, she was a victim because he had stolen her money. And she was just horrified. She was so hurt because she really trusted him. And the first time I met him, I knew he was a grifter. I got very good about that. When you sit there, you get this nose for stuff. And I just knew he was a grifter. And I really wished she'd get away from him. The next thing I heard was that she had committed suicide. See, I had to sit through stuff like that. I had to sit through young people dying from overdoses. I had to put people in jail and say to them, maybe you'll be alive on Monday. It's life. You learn to, this is going to sound so strange, but you learn not to judge. Different kind of judgment. You learn not to pass judgment on people, to think you know who they are, to think you know how they got where they did. You don't know that. You come, you get an impression of how they act in court. You've seen them at the worst time in their life. And you can't use that against them in my book. I tried to look at the entire situation before I made a decision because I was quite sure that what I did is going to really impact on this person's life. You know what's so funny about it? Especially since I've retired, wherever I am, I was in ShopRite and a young woman ran up to me and she said, "Are you Judge Finn? You are Judge Finn, right?" I said, "Yes, I am." She said, "I just want to thank you. I want to thank you because you locked me up and you told me I'm putting you in jail so that you'll be alive on Monday morning." And she said, I laid in that jail cell and I said to myself, what are you doing? This woman cares more about whether you live or die than you do. And she made up her mind she was going to do differently. And when she saw me in that store, she said, "I'm a mother. I'm married now. I don't use. I've been clean for 3, 4, whatever it was." It was fabulous to hear that. And I hear that story over and over again from people. Now, you can be the judge who sits there and says, I'm not a social worker, okay? I'm just here to hear these cases. All right, next. No, that's not me. I didn't come here for that. I came here to be a change agent. I always feel empathy for people if it's not something that was just egregiously wrong. When a person, has been out there drinking, they shouldn't have been drinking and driving. They shouldn't have gotten into a fight with their girlfriend or their wife. They shouldn't have put their hands on them. But you have to understand people are human. That's what it's the human condition that we're dealing with. And I have to always say to myself, if this was Joe Blow, who's worth $10 million, his family, and are well known in the community, who put his hands on his wife, and this is Joe No, okay, we don't care about him because everybody knows he drinks and gambles and whatever, and his family name isn't great, they're known around the area, and then you're going to treat them differently in the same circumstances. That's wrong. What this show is about is a lot of things. It's about something I said earlier, the human condition. It's about how do we walk through life? What is truth? Who are you? And what does that mean to you? How you get along in your life? Can you get along in life without knowing who you are? Sure. But we're going to talk about what the price of that is. Let's talk about our country. Let's talk about, are we willing to pay the price for freedom? Let's talk about things like that. Because I see things happening in this country that tells me if we are not vigilant, which is the price of democracy, that you be vigilant, we're not going to be free. And so I want to talk about that. I want to talk to young people and tell them how beautiful their walk in life can be. I'm going to be 75 years old this year, and I don't give a damn about that number. I feel great. I feel like I have something to say because I've been there. I've experienced it. I've actually sat in every room in the courtroom. I've been a defendant. I've been called for jury. I never served on a jury because I was an attorney by then. But I got in trouble when I was young, like a lot of people. Okay? So I've been in the courtroom. I've been on the bench. I've been impaneled to see if they were going to sit me on I've been at a jury where they were impaneling jurors. So I know all sides of the courtroom. I understand that people are not the sum of the worst day in their life. They're just not. Some people come into court screaming, "I'm guilty," and I say, "Sit down, take it easy. Let's start over." You're innocent until proven guilty in America, at least up until today. I don't know what's happened since then, but I let people know, look, I'm not here to judge that you've done anything yet. You have a right to say not guilty, and then the people have to prove you're guilty. And so I don't need you to come in here and confess to me. However, if it gets to that point where you say, I want to confess to this because I'm willing to take a plea deal, for instance, and I'm going to admit to such and such. I've had people get up when it was time to take the plea deal and say, but I didn't do it. And I'd say, well, then you're not pleading to it. You got to have a trial. No, but they say I can't win the trial. I said, no, see, we can't do it that way. It's like a horse to water. You can lead them to the truth, but you can't make them believe it. See, that's a big problem. I'm sorry, I keep going back and forth from court to America. That's a big problem in America now. See, people are being told lies and they're believing them. People are actually know what you want to hear. They know what your pain is. And so they come to you with your own pain and say, the reason you don't have a job is because these Mexicans, they up in here taking your job, or these Haitians have come here and they're killing your animals and they're doing this and they're doing that. And people just jump on it because they already want to believe it. That's not how truth works, folks. Truth works like this. Did you see it? Did you hear it? Is there a witness? How did this person get that information? It can't be this broad general stuff. I heard that this is going on. Okay? I've been told. No, well, that's hearsay. See, that's why when we come in a courtroom, we don't allow that stuff except under very strict rules. Because if you didn't see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, then how do you know? We want to know how you knew. Then we'll judge whether you're telling us the truth or not. But you've got people just stand up giving you political spiel. Okay? The black people are your problem. The Latinos are your problem. The gay people are your problem. The immigrants are your problem. No, you're the problem. We shouldn't have elected you. Because now here you are using us against each other again. This has to stop. You better trust not your five senses so much, because that's physical evidence. That's stuff, that's used for seeing what's going on around you. There's also other things. There's material things. A piece of paper, a document can be evidence. Okay? But it's beyond that. What I need to happen now on this earth is for people to be who they are. First, you are a spiritual being having a human experience. I told you, you don't live here. You are just here for a while, and you're going to leave here. So you are a spiritual being. Act like it. What does your spirit tell you? My spirit told me when I saw certain people running for president that they were a grifter and that this is where we were going to be, and here we are. You tell people what they want to hear because you know they're going to go for what we used to call the okie doke. Okay? Okie dokie, whatever you say. Okie dokie. Like you don't have a brain in your head. Don't do that. You're smart. You are living in a world where you can find out anything. Check more than one source, for God's sakes. People get up on the internet and they put lies out there intentionally to get you to do certain things. You got to know this is part of having an internet. And I love the internet. I think it's great. I think it can do so many wonderful things for the human race, but you got to check it. My superpower in life is to be able to reach people. And that's why I've chosen this medium. I've been able in my life to tell stories that touch people, write poetry that touches people, make speeches that touch people. And so it is only natural for me to take the next step and reach as many people as I can to say, you too are chosen. You came here with everything you need to be successful, and you can get there from anywhere if someone gives you the right information and you're willing to receive it. And so I'm willing to give it. So come see about me. I'll be here. So tell your mother, tell your sister, tell your aunties, tell everybody. Judge Finn is retired and on the loose. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Please follow, subscribe, like, and share.